The emperor stated it was impossible to know what they would demand for their assistance, speculating they might try to enforce one or more drastic policy changes. A representative from the elven race, also present at the meeting, confirmed it was almost certain they would attempt to deport or discriminate against representatives of the other intelligent races within the empire. His Majesty added this was precisely why seeking aid from this particular kingdom was the absolute last thing they should do. Naturally, he knew perfectly well that he couldn't afford to be proud, and if no other choice existed, he would even turn to the Holy Kingdom. Just then, his butler arrived and informed him of an urgent matter that required his immediate attention. The emperor began to read the contents of the letter. His interest was piqued, and as he recognized the details lurking within the message, a smile finally spread across his face. A member of the council inquired about the letter's contents. The emperor announced that perhaps they wouldn't have to go into debt to the Holy Kingdom after all. Errol's report indicated that he already had a solution. Meanwhile, the situation in the Merman Empire had become a full-blown catastrophe. The dead, horribly reborn as mindless monsters, swarmed the city roads and attacked civilians, while the knights in the fortresses were paralyzed, not knowing what to do. The people at the walls were begging for the gates to be opened, screaming that they would otherwise die. The new ruler was informed by his scout that a horde of the undead had already crossed the border and attacked a village. The victims were now hammering at the castle's locked gates, pleading for shelter. The current ruler of the Merman Empire is a man named Alan Amarath Janil. He realized the situation was simply horrifying. After the war, things had improved, albeit slightly, but the trust of the Empire's citizens remained fractured, and it was an incredibly difficult situation to manage. The mass invasion of the undead only served to worsen their precarious position. The ruler said aloud that he guessed they could count on the support of their allies. However, he was told that it would not be easy. The kingdom of Damanal was also in an extremely difficult situation. Fortunately, the Holy Kingdom had already offered to save them, so he believed they would have no choice but to accept their offer. Alan sadly remarked that they had no other choice now, and with nothing else they could do, they would have to ask for help from the Holy Kingdom. He, in turn, was furious about their predicament. They questioned if bowing to the Light Realm's Empress was all they could do now, and if there were no other options available at all. The Emperor realized, quite obviously, that they would interfere in the affairs of their empire for years to come. But there was definitely no time to think about that now. The key reason the Holy Kingdom was able to take the initiative in this situation was because of the holy water they distributed. Monsters would flee from its mere odor, and all uncleanness could be cleansed with just a single drop. Many countries had studied the holy water to learn its secret, but all their efforts had been in vain. The Holy Kingdom was now actively offering support to countries plagued by the undead, using their holy water as a powerful incentive. As a pretext, but in return, they demand even more, cornering you into signing absurd treaties. That appears to be their current policy. The Damanal Kingdom was completely at a loss. They had heard whispers that the Melon Empire had already struck an agreement with the Holy Kingdom, despite the latter's outrageous terms. The Arnesian Empire also posed a problem. After winning the war, its influence had grown so immense that aligning with the Holy Kingdom, with whom Area had a strained relation, would be exceedingly difficult. The king realized that amidst all this, something was amiss. Everyone was panicked about the threat of the undead, yet it remained a mystery why the Empire of Arnesia had made no move until now. It was as if they didn't require any assistance whatsoever. While it seems improbable, a way to handle this entire undead crisis must be found. Just then, the butler interrupted, informing His Highness that a letter had arrived from the Arnesian Empire. The old king's interest was piqued, and he immediately absorbed its contents. They claimed to provide the means to annihilate the undead at a substantially lower cost. Meanwhile, a short time earlier in Philia, the head alchemist was intrigued, asking if Errol was referring to the creation of holy water. The prince observed his companion, recalling his own secret attempts to acquire some holy water. It turned out to be no ordinary water, but some strange, concentrated mana. This was why he couldn't analyze it, and yet, it appeared that Errol could, to a certain extent, reproduce its composition. If it was what he suspected, the subordinate was utterly overjoyed, exclaiming that he would achieve what no one in history had ever managed. Errol simply smiled and said a man has to make a living somehow. His mind drifted back, and the hero wondered if this was his 45th reincarnation or if he was already in his 46th life. He was reborn into a world where a single religious kingdom governed the entire continent, and there he encountered the only saint he had ever truly acknowledged. She was not someone who merely basked in universal support. She was genuinely dedicated to her service and to achieving world peace for others. One day, she confided in the hero that she feared the holy water she could create would never be enough for everyone. Furthermore, its price was far too high for the common folk. The saint desperately wanted to find a way to mass-produce holy water for them, or better yet, for the entire world, so she implored the hero for his assistance. He bowed deeply, promising he would do everything in his power to make it a reality. Back then, Errol had cooperated with her because he was truly moved by her conviction for a better world, so much so that she was willing to sacrifice one of her primary sources of income. Reflecting on that past life, the hero realized how naive he'd been, but that very experience, carried through his rebirth, was the reason he had now succeeded. The artificial holy water created by Errol was complete, and the head alchemist, ecstatic, confirmed it was real, but he couldn't fathom how the young man had produced it in such a remarkably short amount of time. Errol, filled with pride, explained that the effect was still slightly different from the genuine article, But there was one incredibly satisfying advantage to his artificial holy water. It could be manufactured in massive quantities, and its price was nearly identical to that of ordinary water. Therefore, establishing continuous production to combat the current crisis was now entirely feasible. All that remained was to finalize the production technology and ship the supplies to the front lines. Very little time passed after that conversation before the water was exactly where it was needed most, upon the walled fortifications ready for the knights, and poured it directly onto the walking dead. Just as Mr. Errol predicted, Nesset's forces immediately began to crumble. He offers this holy water at a fraction of the Holy Kingdom's price, effectively becoming their savior, and the wolves were ecstatic to hear the news from Aurella. Meanwhile, Emperor Merman fumed, outraged that any nation could exploit the situation without consequence. Still, he couldn't help but wonder, was this so-called fake holy water actually effective? As His Majesty seethed, a messenger from Eresia approached him. Another letter had arrived, this one from Emperor Thurl, who anticipated that many nations would be skeptical about this artificial holy water. Therefore, his son, Aurella Eresia, almost as if he were reborn with forgotten knowledge, was prepared to give them a personal demonstration. An invitation was sent to every country currently under siege by the undead, and the emperor strongly encouraged everyone to attend, an invitation that even reached the Empress of the Holy Empire. Following this, Errol himself was inundated with a flood of letters. The young man could hardly believe the sheer volume, as more and more influential figures clamored for a chance to see his face. Even the Holy Kingdom was demanding an audience. Dio, ever the worrier, anxiously asked if everything was truly going to be all right. Until now, the young prodigy had kept his identity a secret for security purposes. The prince, however, simply remarked that it was fine, all thanks to his business. Besides, it was becoming impossible to hide his otherworldly genius any longer. The enchantress, however, suspected his true motives ran deeper. Errol noted that she knew him well. In truth, this reveal was a calculated move with three objectives, a grand strategy for his reborn life. First, it would put every nation in his debt. He wanted to ensure his invention would be etched into history for saving countless souls, a legacy he could leverage in the future. His second reason was just as crucial. It would exponentially increase the demand for his product across the entire continent, shattering the rumor that he was just some weak genius who was indifferent to the world's affairs. While being called a genius was fine, he certainly couldn't allow them to see him as indifferent. It was time to show them the dire consequences that awaited anyone foolish enough to sour relations with him. The girl recognized this instantly. The gentleman was back to his old tricks, and his final reason? Pure, unadulterated profit. He intended to rake in even more gold, and this was the perfect opportunity to strike a bargain. With that settled, it wasn't long before the day of the presentation arrived. The assembled crowd stared in utter disbelief as Errol made his entrance, realizing that this mere boy was the one from the infamous Arnesia clan. Glancing around, Pritz noted the impressive attendance, with representatives from the Kingdom of Dionel, the Kingdom of Phelan, and even the Duchy of Ketchen. Just as suspected, the Merman Empire was conspicuously absent, confirming the rumors of their secret deal with the Holy Kingdom. The attendees began whispering amongst themselves, not about politics, but about the fact that this legendary inventor was still just a boy. Our hero heard every word perfectly but let none of it show, simply offering a smile as he said he was flattered by all the attention. He then greeted the assembly and formally introduced himself. I'm sure you are all wondering if this artificial holy water truly has the same effect as the genuine article. It is, in fact, a complete analog, with the only exception that a slightly larger quantity is required for the same result. But I understand it's difficult to believe based on mere words on paper, which is why I have prepared a live demonstration for you all. The prince then signaled for SAA to make the preparations, and she dramatically pulled the cloak off a large cage. Inside, a living corpse thrashed violently. The audience gasped in horror at the sight of an undead creature, right there. Seeing their panic, Aurel calmly reassured them. Please, do not worry. This specimen poses no danger. Having applied the necessary magic, he signaled his subordinates to continue, and a young woman immediately brought forth the artificial holy water, pouring its contents into the cage. The liquid made instant contact with the captive, which began to scream in agony before the undead creature was completely eradicated. The hero coolly noted that the show was over and asked if they required another demonstration. It was painfully obvious that the onlookers were deeply unsettled. Errol mused that this assembly of weaklings was more predictable than he'd imagined. They undoubtedly saw him as purely ruthless. Not only did he bring the undead here, but he also personally obliterated them without blinking. He was certainly not the naive child they had mistaken him for. Suddenly, a voice from the audience asked about the price of his holy water. Aurel knew that while the artificial holy water was far cheaper, each country would need at least a dozen tons, so he acknowledged that many were currently facing financial hardship, and he would not demand that the entire bill be settled at once. Of course, he wasn't offering it for free either. Having invested a great deal himself, he would accept payment at a future date as soon as they were in a position to pay. The audience understood this was a line of credit. Ale knew the base liquid cost no more than common water, but given the dire circumstances, he could inflate the price tag considerably. Abruptly, he was asked if someone could pose a question. Our hero replied that he was listening intently. It was a young woman who questioned if his artificial holy water had any connection to the Holy Kingdom. The prince, who had been reborn with advanced knowledge, was only mildly surprised by this directness. He stated that he fully understood their concerns but assured them that the two were completely different things. To clarify, he explained that the proper name for his artificial holy water is artificial mana neutralizer. The effect might seem similar, but the principles and methods of its production are fundamentally different. Ale created it out of concern that the Holy Kingdom was incapable of providing enough of their holy water. He added that any complaints about his commodity would result in the forfeiture of his future support. With that, his presentation was concluded. He could supply any amount of water they needed. The choice to accept was now theirs. On the southeastern border of the Duchy of Kreidel, the hordes of the dead were overwhelming. The knights defending the fortress were horrified, seeing no end to the onslaught of these vile things. If the situation continued, their defenses would be breached. It was merely a matter of time. Suddenly, a subordinate rushed to the commander, reporting that the artificial holy water, sent from the Arnesian Empire, had arrived. The commander could scarcely believe his eyes when he saw it. He was astounded by the sheer volume of the shipment. Not wasting a moment, he declared they had to test it immediately, ordering his subordinates to prepare for its deployment. They grabbed large sprinklers and filled them with that very liquid, after which they began dousing the dead from the fortress walls. The artificial holy water was perfectly effective, so the soldiers were ordered to charge forward and fight without fear. The first team would engage and neutralize the creatures, while the second team would use the artificial holy water to ensure their utter destruction, preventing any foul reincarnation. The soldiers roared in victory as the foul things dissolved before them. The commander, who thought all was lost, saw the tide of battle change in an instant. Prince Errol, a royal from a foreign land, had much to be grateful for, especially once his artificial holy water was delivered to every nation except the Merman Empire. People immediately began eradicating the undead through various means, even applying magic. Naturally, this magic was infused with the holy water itself. In this endeavor, the most unique method devised was to create a bomb that was charged entirely with the potent liquid. A knight voiced his concern, asking if this wasn't a military weapon usually reserved for the defense of the imperial palace. A fellow soldier remarked that they had been granted special permission to use it for this crisis, and thus their arrows were now filled to the brim with holy water. Before the assault began, Errol declared that everyone must understand that personally dousing these zombies was far too risky, so they would simply shoot them with these blessed water arrows. The knights had no other choice but to embrace this new strategy. The undead could only stare blankly as the holy water arrows rained, striking and utterly obliterating them. The joy among the archers was boundless. At last, they were able to destroy these abominations from a completely safe distance. The commander realized how incredibly fortunate they were, all thanks to Prince Errol, who had provided them with the water at a substantially reduced price. He decided not to be sparing and to use as much as was needed, so he ordered the next volley to be readied. Sometime later, the Dark Knight arrived, having gathered new information about the undead. The necromancer was in a state of disbelief, absolutely horrified that hundreds of thousands of his creations had been almost entirely wiped out in just 1 week, with only a quarter of them left. If everything had gone according to his grand design, the cursed rulers of every country would already be kneeling at his feet. For this, he cursed the name Aurella Eresia, this prince who acted with the foresight of a man ***, reborn ***. When the necromancer first created his legions of the living dead, his only concern was the authentic holy water from the Holy Realm. He knew there would certainly not be enough of that to ever defeat his entire undead army. It was a complete mystery, where this man had acquired this artificial holy water from. The necromancer had to overthrow the mages of the tower that oppressed them and usher in the era of the dark sect. He could not just sit here and watch his plans crumble. Sometime later, Asa reported to the prince that scouts were confirming all remaining undead were now concentrated in a single location, seemingly to protect their creator, and that the Black Mage punitive units formed by secret agreement were expected to gradually approach the place of the siege. Errol wondered if the necromancer was truly hiding, using the undead as a shield. If that were the case, he would never make it out of there alive. Suddenly, the girl inquired how to handle the formal complaint that the Holy Kingdom had filed against them. The prince simply told her to ignore, calling it a bunch of nonsense that was not even worth reading, and to disregard any further messages they might send. He then turned to Dee, asking for her assessment of their enemy mage. After a moment of thought, the sorceress said that capturing him as quickly as possible would be ideal, but she suspected it would not be easy, as he had hundreds of thousands of undead under his command. She admitted she was not well versed in necromancy. However, according to reputable sources, the maximum recorded number of undead a 7th-level mage had ever controlled was a mere 30,000. Errol confirmed that her information was indeed correct. Dia conceded that she did not know his methods, but it was very likely that he possessed tremendous power, yet even his power must have a limit, and that was the moment they would strike and capture him. Errol considered her words, thinking that perhaps this fight would not be easy. It seemed his knowledge from before his *** reincarnation *** was incomplete. Should he really just sit on the sidelines? The furious battle with the battle against the undead was still raging on when suddenly, one of the knights shouted that the Dark Mage had shown himself, ordering everyone to focus their fire. Following the new command, the wizards and everyone else immediately unleashed their spells, but even their most devastating attacks were utterly ineffective. The necromancer had erected a formidable shield that deflected everything, after which he mockingly asked if they truly thought they could defeat him with such pathetic incantations. Following his own arrogant words, he began to channel his own power, prompting a knight to yell for defensive magic to be cast. Immediately, while the rest of the unit attempted to strike the enemy from behind, but the necromancer was already aware of their movements. He repelled their pincer attack as well, though the strain of deflecting so much power was clearly taking its toll on him. Seeing the blood, the sorcerer coughed up. He knew his situation was dire. His body was already buckling under the strain. Withstanding the backlash from such a grand offensive, annoyed, he concluded that he had no choice but to retreat and devise a new plan. To that end, he unleashed his acid cloud skill, which confused the knights who mistook it for a poisonous mist that needed to be neutralized. To be neutralized with magic immediately. With visibility reduced to nothing, the dark wizard began to make his escape. The necromancer himself seethed, unable to believe that he was forced to flee from wizards so far beneath his level. He swore to himself that he would surely avenge today's humiliation, promising them a fate worse than death, knowing full well who he had fought. They would soon discover this hideout, so he needed to grab the essentials and disappear. But suddenly, a voice echoed from behind him. The sound startled him greatly. The voice calmly stated that after seeing so many books and scrolls, it was clear this wizard was a complete amateur. And a profound disappointment. The speaker was Aurella, but the necromancer didn't recognize him and demanded to know who he was. The prince simply smiled and introduced himself, adding that he had come to collect the man's blackened soul. The necromancer was baffled, unable to understand how anyone could have possibly found this secret location. The boy noted that, thanks to the diligent work of his specialists, tracking him down was not difficult at all. He then offered to explain his reasons for this little visit. First, he was curious about the magical systems used by local sorcerers. It seemed like a good opportunity after his reincarnation. So he decided to come and observe, but unfortunately, he found nothing of value. And second, the matter of the wizard's crime. As it happened, he had not only raised legions of the undead to serve him, but had also launched attacks on several fortresses, spreading terror among the people. He was the quintessential dark sorcerer, and as the prince, a strange wind lifted the papers in the room. Errol watched, wondering what pathetic spell the wizard was attempting now. He then demanded the necromancer explain what was truly going on, asking if he needed a demonstration of what would happen if he refused to start talking. The necromancer flew into a rage at his condescending words, and unleashing his dark power, he screamed. That the boy dared to speak so dismissively to him, the great sorcerer Nelwar himself. But just as he moved to attack, he felt a sudden impact. He didn't even register what had happened before he found himself slammed onto the ground, utterly defeated. The first thought that crossed his mind was that he'd been attacked by the boy standing beside him. The hero observed that even powerful mages are, in the end, just ordinary people. Put them under a little pressure, and their minds become too rattled to properly wield their magic. Having made his point, he asked Nelwar if he really needed to gather an army of the undead just to invade and enslave the neighboring countries. That must have been his master plan. No ordinary boy would have conceived of such a thing, the wizard seethed, continuing to rage and demanding to know how he dared to insult him. He boasted that his army of the dead was quite literally invincible, prompting Errol to ask if that was the grand point he was trying to make. Compared to regular soldiers, your undead army might seem powerful, Errol conceded, but I have to wonder what your plan is for them. Afterward, is it even possible to rule a world filled with nothing but the undead? At first, you might see yourself as a king, sitting atop a throne of corpses, but in the end, it would become painfully clear that there is no one left to rule and you are just a lonely figure on an empty seat. Nil screamed at him to be silent, blaming Errol for interrupting his grand declaration. It was incomprehensible to him how this mere pup dared to ruin his life's work. The prince simply remarked that his reaction was understandable. You always need to find someone else to blame, don't you? It's a comfortable enough position to take. Errol realized he had been foolish to assume there was some profound reason for his actions. It had been a complete waste of time. A quick death was a mercy he didn't deserve. As the prince, it's my responsibility to ensure your death is slow, agonizing, and humiliating. This is for the sake of all those who have fallen victim to your depraved plan. The necromancer was clearly not going to accept that fate lying down. He struggled to his feet, channeling his dark powers as he ordered Errol to shut his mouth, preparing to make his finest masterpiece rise. Indeed, another undead figure, vastly different from the others, began to emerge. Upon seeing it, Errol noted that it was simply disgusting. Even grave desecration should have its limits, after all, he commented. The necromancer went on to claim that this was his greatest creation, a warrior reborn from the bodies of specially selected fighters. No matter how strong you are, he bellowed, you won't be able to defeat its perfect form. The hero calmly considered what to do, perhaps just tear it apart, but in that case, he would get his hands dirty, and if he contracted some vile disease, it would be a terrible inconvenience. Soon, a better idea came to him, and he decided to try something else. The enemy monstrosity lunged to attack him. Errol didn't panic in the slightest, but instead asked how many people were sacrificed to create this one creature. I'm going to put an end to this twisted reincarnation. To do so, he unleashed his own power, namely his purification skill. Immediately, a change came over the undead creature. It was as if its dark power was draining away, and soon its entire form fell to the ground, the last spark of its unholy life extinguished. Nil stared in horror, stammering, What kind of purification was that? Unclear as to how he possessed a power exclusive to saints and holy kingdoms, the boy simply pointed out that, You haven't patented it, have you? What claim could you possibly have to it? His adversary still couldn't comprehend it, because it was supposed to be impossible. This power was comparable to true holiness, perhaps even stronger. Errol himself knew that this was only a pale imitation of purification, far inferior in power to the original, but for the Locals, even this was an unattainable miracle. It looked like his enemy had finally reached his limit. The necromancer was terrified and pleaded for him to stay back, surprising Errol further by attempting to offer a deal. He desperately explained that if he were allowed to go, it wouldn't be for free. He was willing to pay a very good price. The prince approached him slowly and said he was making a fuss, and frankly, so it was time to be done with this. Nil finally realized he was in inescapable trouble. It wasn't long before the knights burst into the sorcerer's home. They informed him that he was surrounded, ordering him to surrender and humbly accept his death. The first knight to enter the scene was met with a startling and gruesome sight, a horrifying, bloody mess. It was initially unclear what had transpired, particularly the origin of the brutalized corpse, but judging by the faint traces of dark mana, it had to be the sorcerer. The knight was conflicted, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Adding to the mystery, a note was left on a nearby table. It claimed that someone had eliminated the sorcerer for them, and that they were welcome. Signed by someone calling themselves a pro from a past life, a clear hint at a reincarnation. In the end, the sorcerer's dark ambition was brought to an end, forcing him to kneel before an international court. Errol later learned how the official story was presented to the public, though it barely captured the true horror of what that man had done. It had been a difficult ordeal, but with the problems solved, it was finally time to focus on rebuilding the city. All's well that ends well, though Errol was disappointed he couldn't uncover any information about the enemy Darksec's headquarters. He even scoured his past life's knowledge, but came up empty. If any more of them crawl out of the woodwork, he'll simply swat them like roaches. With his work done for the day, he decided it was time to relax. Meanwhile, in the Holy Kingdom of Jalan, things were far from peaceful. Ayla had just smashed a vial of artificial holy water, and the man who witnessed this called the creator a heretic. He found it incomprehensible that someone would dare infringe upon God's grace, demanding an explanation from Mistress Nenia. He questioned her inaction, as Nenia was the revered saint of the Jellian Kingdom. The woman simply asked what, precisely, he expected her to do. Was he suggesting she should condemn the Eresia Empire for mitigating the damage from the Nervian invasion, and for saving her own people? The priest retorted that holy water is a miracle that only she, the saint, could bestow. Nenia failed to see the problem. Did he truly believe only the saint, and no one else, possessed the right to make use of holy water? She wasn't some kind of profiteer. If it helped save people, then all the complaints were just empty words. She warned him not to do anything foolish, making it clear where this conversation was headed. The priest acknowledged her point, and the saint privately reflected that the Merman Empire had to be dealt with first. Only then could she turn her attention to Aurella Arnesia. At the very least, she felt she should see his insolent face for herself. It was all for the sacred doctrines and the interests of the Light Kingdom, of course. Time passed, and the tale of the Undead Invasion slowly faded into memory. Errol was now 17 years old, enjoying a flight on Fry under the brilliant Philian sky. Besides the battle with the undead, a lot of other things had happened. Fry even got a girlfriend and had children. Meanwhile, Aiken and his blacksmiths were attempting to replicate Damascus steel, and even smelt titanium. But the most significant change was to Philia itself. The prince marveled at the vibrant colors of his new buildings. This was his city, a testament to his efforts in this reborn life. A subordinate spotted Errol and asked if a third of the housing project could be prioritized for completion. Errol praised their fine work and expressed his hope that they could finish the remaining sections just as quickly. Before long, the townspeople arrived, gazing at their new homes in utter amazement. Their lord told them to get ready, as they would be able to move in very soon. He asked one woman what she thought, and if she would miss her old hometown. She replied that this was far too beautiful to miss anything, and that without their lord, none of this would be possible. Would have never imagined such homes, as the crowd's cheers echoed around them. Errol observed their joyful reception of the new buildings, but decided it was probably time to depart. Noticing this, a worker quickly approached, asking if he was leaving without inspecting the remaining structures. The prince assured him that he was confident in the quality of the construction, adding that at this pace, the project wouldn't be finished anytime soon, and he already had the next phase to prepare for. The man's inquiry about this next stage brought a knowing smile to the prince's face, and he announced that once the new homes are all complete, it would be the perfect occasion for a grand housewarming feast. Hearing this, Asha turned to him, surprised, and asked if he truly intended to host a banquet to celebrate the city's construction. Errol confirmed it was true, questioning her surprise. Did she find it so strange to gather everyone for a proper celebration on such a momentous occasion? The girl quickly apologized and reached out to check his forehead for a fever. She was relieved to find he wasn't ill, but the idea of a banquet was still bizarre. For all these years, he had actively shunned and ignored the social gatherings of the entire aristocracy. It was so out of character, it almost felt to Asha like he had been completely reborn, a different person from the Errol she knew. The prince, however, didn't understand why she was having such an extreme reaction. To him, it wasn't a big deal. He simply figured they could leverage the excitement, both within the city and beyond. He explained that while Philia was growing at an incredible rate, it was still considered a remote backwater by the rest of the world, just some isolated place in the snows. Consequently, they received hardly any visitors aside from a few merchants. But if he were to organize a grand banquet, people would be drawn to their city if not out of genuine interest in Philia itself, then at least out of curiosity about his own humble self. Finally, a flicker of understanding crossed the girl's face. Errol continued, explaining that simply building the city was only one part of the monumental task. It still needed to be promoted and developed. On that note, he added, "I'd like to hear your opinion on something, Asha." She asked him what he had in mind. The prince pointed out that while a banquet was a fine idea, they currently lacked anyone with the expertise to properly organize such an event. "Asha, you come from a noble family," he said, "so I was hoping to entrust this matter to you. Of course, I won't be sitting idly by either," he added. Asha replied that while her experience in high society was limited, she would absolutely do her best to assist him. Aurella was pleased, telling her he would be grateful for her help, but also warned her not to get too overwhelmed. It wouldn't just be a local banquet, a few powerful aristocrats would be attending, and there was even a chance his own father might make an appearance. Asha immediately understood this would be no simple task, so she declared she would get right on the case. Aurella looked confused by her phrase, but she quickly clarified that she would do everything in her power to meet his expectations. It was at that moment the prince realized her determination was absolute. As time went on, he found himself pondering the guest list for the event. He mused that high society was such a foolish relic of the past. No matter who you invited, you were bound to offend someone. In general, he had no real friends among either his trading partners or the influential aristocrats. Inviting only the nobility would make him look like a complete snob. Therefore, he needed to strike a delicate balance and invite a diverse group of people. The entire political dance annoyed him greatly. Frustrated, he finally snapped that he was fed up with it all. He couldn't understand why Asha was even bothering with such details. He decided to just throw caution to the wind, because it wasn't in his original nature to fret over these matters. After his reincarnation, he knew results were what mattered. So, he'd just invite everyone. Shortly after, an aristocrat who received an invitation stared at it in disbelief. Was this correct? Aurel himself was hosting. The very same son remarked that this was clearly no simple banquet, while my youngest son questioned if it was truly that important. He was told he was merely a child and couldn't possibly understand the full picture. Errol, you see, is an exceptionally private person, except for the rare occasions of his first birthday and his coming-of-age ceremony. He simply didn't show his face in public. Even Kania attended far more social functions than he ever did. He declined every single invitation from the aristocrats, consistently citing his busy schedule. His health was known to be excellent, so it was difficult for anyone to argue. In other words, this particular banquet signified that he was now squarely in the sights of the entire aristocracy. The man could only hope to use this chance to finally forge a connection with him, while the whole world seemed to be preparing. Lyanna contacted her son, thrilled that he was personally organizing such a grand affair. The emperor himself was also invited and stated he would attempt to clear his schedule for the day. As a result, news spread across nearly the entire continent that Philia was celebrating the city's grand construction. As time passed, Errol began to feel the weight of it all. It became obvious that preparing for the banquet was incredibly tedious, but thanks to everyone's proactive help, he was certain everything would proceed without a hitch. The party was set for the next day, and when the morning of the banquet arrived, more and more carriages streamed into the city. Every one of them carried famous aristocrats. It was hard to fathom that, until this was a forgotten backwoods area that even merchant wagons couldn't reach. The land itself felt as if it had been reborn. Suddenly, a guard spotted a man, which surprised him. He was asked if he could speed up the identity checks and let the carriages in, as the nobles could not tolerate waiting for so long. Peering out of the window, Errol thought about how impatient everyone was, probably just here for a free meal. The main banquet doesn't even start until nightfall, yet they've been causing a fuss since morning. At the very least, they were now realizing who they were dealing with. Although it was a rather transparent display of interest, with everyone hoping to meet him early, he was far too lazy to entertain them. A maid informed her master that the guests were beginning to arrive in earnest. Our hero acknowledged this and asked to be escorted to the location he had reserved a couple of days ago. It wasn't long before Marquis Ket arrived in Philia as well. He quickly realized that Errol had every right to be proud of his city. He hadn't understood that the boy had already completed it. The place looked absolutely magnificent. A servant informed the man that they would escort him to a private salon where he could rest before the banquet began. The Marquis agreed, thinking that it was certainly a beautiful and impressive city. However, at the same time, he felt it was such a pity. It was notoriously frigid here, with snow covering the ground even in summer. Philia is, after all, a land of bitter cold. He wondered if the young prince's charm, this sudden reincarnation of his public persona, could help melt the ice. It wasn't that cold today, though, which made him wonder if it had always been this pleasant. This was hardly the place known for its severe frosts and freezing gales. In fact, a man standing nearby commented that he had dressed very warmly, but contrary to the rumors, it was quite comfortable here. The Marquis couldn't fathom how this could be. Watching their bewildered faces, our hero knew they were all puzzled, noting that it was actually warm inside. He was truly looking forward to seeing their expressions when they finally discovered the truth. Soon after, Asha reported to Ale that every detail of the banquet's preparations had been meticulously double-checked. After several thorough inspections of the guest seating, the culinary arrangements, and the hall's lighting, no problems were found. The prince offered his thanks for culinary arrangements and the hall's lighting, the outstanding work, commending Asia on her exceptional performance. While Asia was pleased, she humbly insisted he needn't thank her, as it was her honor to be of service. However, she then cautiously asked if His Highness was truly certain about the choice of the banquet's location. He explained that he considered it the perfect venue to showcase their town and couldn't understand her apprehension. He assured her there was no need for concern, as he had never once erred in his judgment. With no other recourse, Asia relented and stated she would proceed directly to her patrol. Hearing this, the prince expressed surprise, insisting that she must rest and conserve her energy for the banquet. Startled, Asia asked the Rishi prince if this meant she was also required to attend the celebration. He admitted that it had completely slipped his mind to tell her, explaining that he had already informed Dia and Sha, and now it was her turn. He declared that all of his closest aides were required to attend the blank banquet, with no exceptions. Asia was utterly stunned by this sudden command, protesting that it was too abrupt and she was completely unprepared. But the prince simply told her not to worry, as he had already arranged for everything. With a gesture, he summoned several maids and entrusted Asia to their care, and they immediately whisked her away for preparations. Just then, another maid approached to inform the prince that a request had arrived from the capital to activate the teleportation magic circle. The prince noted that they were arriving precisely on schedule and that she should go to greet them. As a formality, invitations had been sent to the entire imperial family. The majority had sent their regrets. The royal concubines had no compelling reason to attend, and his older brother was preoccupied with mending his public image, which had been damaged after the recent Undead Invasion. His sister, Kana, also declined, citing an upcoming duel with one of the sword masters. It seemed she was determined to win and gain recognition, which meant the only person expected to arrive from the teleportation circle at any moment was Alan's own mother, accompanied by her maid. Upon arriving, her first comment was on the sheer convenience of teleportation, remarking on how quickly it had brought them there. The prince embraced his mother warmly, overjoyed at her arrival, and she replied that she could never miss a banquet that was personally organized by her own son. She added that His Majesty the Emperor was also greatly looking forward to the event and would arrive as soon as he concluded his affairs. The prince acknowledged that, in this reborn life, he would have to work tirelessly to meet the emperor's expectations. He understood that for the emperor to travel to such a remote location for a banquet hosted by a mere prince was a highly unusual affair, but it was now time for the event to begin. As the guests started to arrive, a wave of confusion spread through the crowd. They hadn't imagined the banquet would be held in this location, which seemed more like a public square than a formal venue. Of course, outdoor banquets weren't unheard of, but they were usually held in lush gardens or scenic meadows where one could admire the surroundings. This place offered no such beauty. Whispers began to circulate that the young prince simply lacked a basic understanding of such affairs and had made a terrible mistake, though others saw it as a chance to connect with Prince Alan regardless. They decided to treat the evening as a simple reconnaissance mission. Alan overheard their murmurs and sensed their disappointment, but he knew they only needed to be patient. A moment later, the surrounding streets and houses were suddenly illuminated, and the entire atmosphere felt completely reborn. The square suddenly blazed with an ethereal glow, prompting the astonished crowd to murmur that it was as bright as midday, surely the work of powerful magic. Just as expected, word spread like wildfire that the prince had eschewed the stuffy banquet hall, opting for the grand square to stage his demonstration. A whisper went through the attendees, advising them to temper their amazement, as this light show was merely a prelude to the main event. This warning came from a keen observer, who saw that the audience was already completely mesmerized by Philia's technological prowess. The advanced technology had jaws hitting the floor, and he urged his companions to quickly confirm if their special guests were ready for what was next. Fina confirmed she was prepared, though a hint of nervousness lingered in her voice. Catching this, our hero turned to her, assuring her that she looked absolutely incredible. He even teased her, asking if her elaborate hairstyle was a wig. A slight blush touched her cheeks as she explained she simply wanted her appearance to harmonize with his. She confessed to feeling a bit awkward, being unaccustomed to such formal wear, but emphasized that she was truly grateful. The prince then shifted his attention to Asia, playfully chiding her for being shy and encouraging her to step into the light, reminding her it wasn't her first public event. Her sudden bashfulness was puzzling. Asia quietly clarified that she was much younger then and hadn't worn such an elegant gown for a very long time. Errol cut in, telling them not to second-guess themselves for a moment because they both looked truly stunning. And at that exact instant, Dia made her grand entrance, coolly inquiring what was happening. The prince immediately shot her a look of approval, gesturing that her outfit was spectacular. She returned the gesture with a confident smirk. Seeing his companions were ready, the prince announced it was time to proceed and completely blow the guests' minds. Meanwhile, the banquet attendees were indulging in the lavish feast, unanimously declaring the cuisine to be of the highest caliber. Yet, a single question was on everyone's mind. Where was the architect of this grand event? Abruptly, a strange transformation began at the central The massive structure started to whir and shift, deconstructing itself into several distinct parts before the very eyes of the dazed crowd. As the fountain opened, a silhouette emerged from within. Even the stoic Lay couldn't hide his shock at the sight of Errol appearing from the mechanical heart of the structure. He was flanked by his loyal retinue, and behind them rose an enormous, heroic statue. Errol surveyed the stunned audience, a smirk playing on his lips as he silently asked if they were impressed. This was the ultimate power move, a climactic display designed to broadcast their immense wealth and progressive vision, perfectly embodied by the magnificent statue of the hero himself. A wave of varied reactions washed over the guests. Some were utterly speechless, while others who knew him thought to themselves that Errol's penchant for the dramatic was as grand as it had always been. Stepping forward, the prince officially welcomed his guests and began his address. He began by extending his personal thanks to all who had accepted the invitation to this festive banquet, held to celebrate the incredible rebuilding of the city. The purpose of this evening, he declared, is to acquaint you with the fruits of our labor. He paused, letting the anticipation build, hoping they were thoroughly intrigued. We have cultivated an entire new layer of business opportunities here, he continued, so I invite you to begin fantasizing about what it would be like to move and thrive here. He then added that while he would love to give a personal tour, he must first welcome their final, most distinguished guest. His Majesty, Emperor Aurella Eresia, has just joined us. As the emperor approached, he began to speak to the assembled nobles. Speaking not only as their emperor, but as the proud father of a son who seems entirely reborn, he expressed his gratitude that they had all traveled so far for Errol's first official banquet. Our hero's heart swelled with pride upon hearing such a powerful endorsement from his father. With His Majesty's blessing, the moment was finally right. It was time to properly introduce Philia, which he proclaimed as the new center of innovative technology and the nation's crowning achievement. Errol then gestured for the audience to look at the sprawling commercial and residential district of the newly reborn city of Philia. This place, he announced with finality, will be the nexus of all future trade routes. In Philia, which also happens to be the most prosperous area, the safety of its residents is guaranteed by meticulously enforced measures. First and foremost is the barrier, a marvel that Dia demonstrated, leaving the attendees utterly astonished. The very stone used to construct this wall is harder than steel, making it impenetrable to local monsters or any invading army. Since the barrier is under constant maintenance, its defensive power grows stronger by the day. It was even personally tested by a level 7 Fawn Mage, proving its absolute reliability. The crowd was stunned that it was immune to such high-level magic, and one of them stepped forward to ask Prince Errol a question. He pointed out that the region's climate is notoriously harsh, almost uninhabitable, so he wondered how the prince planned to address this critical problem. A knowing smile graced Errol's face as he praised it as a fine question. In truth, the hero had arranged for this man to ask in advance, knowing that indiscriminate questions would only descend into a farce. He then informed the crowd that upon stepping into the city, they must have immediately sensed something unusual. After all, he said, we are all gathered in an open-air banquet hall, yet none of you feel the winter's chill, do you? This is all thanks to the fact that there is a very special magical device installed in the city, the one standing right before their very eyes. And just as he finished, he was asked the question, is that not the farm heater that your highness personally designed? Though the questioner noted it seemed a bit bigger. The prince inwardly smirked, wondering who had asked. It wasn't one of the people he had arranged this with, after all. Still, since he was about to bring it up anyway, he confirmed it was an improved version of the heater, his latest development designed to insulate the entire city. However, their principles of operation are vastly. The previous model only controlled temperature, while this new system manages wind and even snowfall to create a perfectly tailored atmosphere. Thus, even with the harsh climate, it is remarkably comfortable to live here. Someone else asked in utter disbelief if it was all true, and the prince assured him that every word was the absolute truth. He couldn't understand if they genuinely thought he would jest about a project of this magnitude. Indeed, it had cost a fortune, and their wizards were working endless overtime because of it. And so, to a round of thunderous applause, he announced the end of his presentation and invited the guests to enjoy the banquet. Moments later, the prince was swarmed by merchants asking where he planned to begin trading, a detail he had yet to decide on. One man eagerly offered his cooperation, only to be cut off by a rival who insisted that he had said no such thing, claiming his own firm was far better suited for the task. Questions were also fired off about the magical device for environmental regulation, with many asking if it could be installed in their own territories. The young man listened to all of this graciously, though he privately felt that being this popular was utterly exhausting. However, for the sake of the future, he knew he must endure, if only for today. And so, he prepared himself for the next question. Witnessing Prince Aurel's efforts, Asha remarked that it would be great if he always worked as diligently as he did today. She noted that it would be a truly welcome change. For a minute, she thought he was a completely different person, as if he had been entirely reborn. The change was simply astonishing. The guests nearby whispered, marveling that Prince Aro's son's personal knights were so beautiful. Rumor had it that one of them was even stronger than an entire order of knights. Suddenly, a gentleman approached Asha and requested the honor of a single dance. The girl politely apologized to him and began to explain, reminded him that she was currently on duty. Errol couldn't help but wish they could all just set their responsibilities aside and enjoy the evening. The next thing he knew, a group of young ladies was approaching him with an elegant, unrivaled grace, moving so silently that not even a single rustle could be heard. Errol immediately recognized their movements. These ladies were clearly trained to hunt. Ultimately, he realized that he was their primary target. A young woman stepped forward, greeted him, and asked if he would deign to dance with her rather than just standing there looking bored. Our hero mused that typically, a gentleman is the one to ask for a date, but she had clearly changed tactics, seeing him remain silent and stationary. He supposed there were quite a few young ladies his age in attendance tonight. He also felt a pair of intense eyes on him and realized his mother was watching. She was scrutinizing his every move, and the look in her eyes was a clear command for him to accept this young lady's invitation. That's when it dawned on Aurella that while he had been turning down offers, it didn't mean he was giving up on the idea of marriage entirely. It seemed his rejections had made his mother worry, and because of that, he felt the need to make amends. Perhaps pretending to converse with this girl would be enough. What truly wounded his pride, however, was being seen as incapable. Aurella asked the young lady for a single dance, humbly adding that he hoped his dancing wouldn't make her too uncomfortable. She simply smiled and replied that there was no need to worry, as everyone has to start somewhere. Her polite reaction confirmed his suspicion that she was a seasoned socialite. However, what she didn't know was that in his path to being reborn, Errol had already achieved mastery in all forms of dance, from simple steps to complex routines fit for ballroom competitions. After all, one of his new life goals was to become a true Casanova, and that meant he couldn't afford to be passive and be mistaken for some weakling. Therefore, he would be actively socializing and dancing. After finishing the dance with his first partner, he turned to the other hopefuls and told them to take their time. He assured them that tonight he intended to be everyone's partner, so there was no need to worry. He simply asked who would be next, and a whole queue of candidates had already formed to dance with him. True to his word, Aurella actually danced with them all, changing partners one after another, but by the end of it, he simply couldn't take any more and made a swift escape. He suspected these girls were getting payback for all the dance rejections he'd made across his many lives before this reincarnation. His subordinates approached him, asking if he was completely exhausted. They teased that even their lord wasn't perfect, and perhaps he should just let the ladies lead. The prince indignantly replied that he wasn't that bad at dancing. He then wondered aloud why she wasn't dancing herself. The girls simply smiled, reminding him that they were on, but Aurella thought it was a flimsy excuse to avoid the dance floor. His curiosity piqued. He scanned the room to see how many other ladies were present, and when he saw the sheer number of them, he was shocked. Why were there so many? This was quickly becoming an impossible mission. Turning his attention, he looked at Asha and declared he had an idea. He asked her if it was true that she knew how to dance, and if so, he wondered if she would accompany him for a single dance. Errol had noticed that Asha, unlike Saa and Dia, was unable to relax and enjoy the festivities as she continued to watch the other ladies intently, almost as if she longed to join them. The prince then pleaded with his knight to save him from these persistent ladies, at least for a little while. The knight replied that if her lord wished it, then she was more than willing. Our hero added that she could consider it a reward for her hard work in preparing the banquet. After all, the chance to dance with him was worth a small fortune. Asha replied that if that was the case, it would be a great honor for her. She admitted, however, that it had been a long time since she had last danced, so she wasn't very confident. Seeing her hesitation, the young man assured her not to worry, promising he would teach her. He then extended his hand, formally inviting her to a dance. Asha joyfully accepted his proposition, anticipating a truly wonderful evening. And so, the graceful dance of Asha and Errol commenced. As she danced the night away with her master, the young woman reflected on the moment. It felt as though she had been reborn, never imagining she would experience a dance like this again. The prince then declared that this was far superior to the deadly dance of swords before an enemy, explaining that whether in a dance or a fight, the fundamental principles of body movement remain remarkably similar. He advised her to simply relax and surrender to the rhythm, for a dance is merely a fusion of music, physical motion, and a current of inspiration. As Asha and Errol glided across the floor, all the other young ladies could do was watch, biting their lips and Errol, in turn, suggested they transition to a more serious conversation, to which Asha readily agreed. As time wore on, the weary hero found himself thinking that he desperately needed a moment of rest. While he was still in peak physical condition, the mental toll of this new life was truly depleting, a strange burden from his reincarnation. As he sat, his gaze fell upon a man who conspicuously stood out from the crowd. Curiously, this individual was not by himself, yet one could barely notice his companions. Errol found himself increasingly wondering who these mysterious figures could possibly be. Just then, an aide approached and informed him that the number of guests in the banquet hall had swelled. He now understood that there were decidedly more people present than had been invited. They had gatecrashers in their midst. Asha and Errol exchanged a look, silently questioning what their next move should be and if the situation needed to be handled. Mulling it over, Errol considered if he could lure them away to follow him from a distance. He knew he needed to speak with one of them, and soon. The knight at his side remarked that such a move was dangerous and asked if he knew their identities. The hero confirmed that he did not know all of them, but he recognized one specific individual. A flicker of insight told him this was likely a future client with whom a very profitable deal could be struck. To test his theory, he purposefully headed off in a less traveled direction, and just as he predicted, the man began to follow. The hero, sensing he was being tailed, stopped and declared that he was honored to see Helman Melis, the esteemed lord of the Helman Melis Magic Tower, right here at the banquet. This man was, in fact, the renowned head of the Eresia Magic Tower. Helman remarked that he could hardly believe the young man had recognized him so instantly, and asked for forgiveness for his own rudeness and delayed greeting. Errol simply noted that it was just a banquet, urging the man to relax and feel at ease. His new acquaintance then asked how Errol had recognized him, considering they had never formally met before. Errol confirmed this was true, but added that the Tower Master had shown such an obvious and intense interest in their magical inventions that it was impossible not to notice him, especially since this particular person was inquiring specifically about a truss heater. Errol admitted he never expected someone as influential as the Lord of the Magic Tower to personally accept the invitation. He mused that in this reborn life, he never imagined he'd have the opportunity to meet him here. In response, Helman said that it was nothing of the sort. Since the invitation came from Mr. Errol himself, he simply could not ignore it. Errol clarified that this wasn't what he meant. He had assumed he wouldn't be to Helman's liking, given all the fervent messages coming from the Holy Kingdom. He was curious to hear what the Tower Master would say on the matter, having intentionally raised such a sensitive issue. The Lord of the Magic Tower stated that there must be a misunderstanding, insisting he had no reason whatsoever to sympathize with them. Errol then replied with complete honesty, revealing he already knew that Hellman had politely declined their offers. At this, Hellman remarked that Errol was quite perceptive and that he was glad they had reached a mutual understanding. The hero also couldn't help but notice that the Lord of the Magic Tower was surprisingly young. I had pictured a gray-haired old man with a long beard, but judging by this overwhelming mana, it is undoubtedly him and not some deputy. The Lord of the Magic Tower remarked, "While I can certainly boast a vast knowledge of magic, even I must kneel before your highness's ingenuity." Errol demurred, stating it was all thanks to the tireless efforts of their mages who had toiled away. They worked through the night, yes, but the revolutionary concept was yours, your highness. You shouldn't be so modest. It is as if you were reborn with ancient wisdom. Now, was there something you wished to discuss? He asked. Arl thought to himself, it's time to address the real reason I came. The prince then stated he wished to speak in a more private setting, knowing they were both too busy for a separate, formal meeting. And before we get into that discussion, Arl continued, there is something we must first address. Are you aware of the individuals lurking behind you? They have been observing you for quite some time, he added, but unlike the esteemed Lord of the Magic Tower, they lack any sort of invitation. Frankly, I never understood why sorcerers insist on wearing only black. I'd heard white is quite in fashion these days. Perhaps they ought to try something a bit more cheerful, he mused. The mages bristled with anger, shouting at him to hold his tongue. Hellman calmly noted, I did indeed sense their foul manna. As I suspected, this is not merely a matter of poor taste. The uninvited sorcerers then formed a line. They identified Aurella Eresia as the one who had thwarted their comrades, and the Lord of the Magic Tower as one who would surely impede their future deeds, they declared, demanding they surrender and follow them quietly. The protagonist feigned surprise. He wondered aloud, is this an offense for developing artificial holy water? Suddenly, the Lord of the Magic Tower interjected. It was my mistake, he said coolly. It appears the cockroaches have managed to scurry all the way here. The unfamiliar mages united, asking if they dared to oppose them? No matter how powerful you are, Lord of the Magic Tower, you cannot possibly handle the three of us at once. RL's mind raced. These black mages were all at the seventh circle. In that case, it was clear how they had managed to slip past the knights completely unnoticed. Hellman scoffed. Such grand pronouncements for a gaggle of low-grade wizards. Before unleashing his power, he unleashed an overwhelming force, a display of eighth circle magic that warped the very air. The necromancer screamed defiantly that he couldn't handle them. You're too slow, was his only comment, before his spell sent all three of them hurtling violently into the air. Errol lost sight of them for a moment, only to realize they had been flung high toward the ceiling, and as he was processing this, he saw that his enemies had already crashed back to the ground. They must have been in agonizing pain. The man had nearly obliterated. So, it was gravity magic, Errol observed internally, and his skill is masterful. It's not surprising, since the title Lord of the Magic Tower is clearly not an empty one. Hellman turned to him, reporting, I was attempting to keep this as quiet as possible, but I am still obliged to apologize for using magic on your territory without permission. I shall, of course, offer a formal apology at a later time. The prince waved a hand dismissively. That won't be necessary. It was quite a spectacular show. I was also curious to witness what you were capable of. His companion asked in surprise, does this mean your knights were simply standing by and watching this entire time? Aurella was slightly flustered that the man had noticed. The Lord of the Magic Tower then asked, speaking of these black mages, would your highness mind if I take care of them personally? Errol replied, on the contrary, I would be grateful. Hellman thanked him for his consideration. Thank you for your understanding, he said. Now, why did your highness seek me out today? The prince replied, regarding the matter of Philia's future. Will be to seriously engage in the development of magical equipment, but his own people are already swamped with work. Lacking the manpower to handle it all, he wishes to outsource some projects to trustworthy external parties, and he had initially considered asking Ingpain. However, with the Lord of the Magic Tower himself standing before him, he decided to extend the offer directly, and Hellman was immediately intrigued. He inquired about the specific items Aurella planned to create, but Errol noted that while various items were planned, he couldn't go into the finer details in such a public setting. Hellman replied, in that case, I shall look forward to it. Personally, he had no objections to, but he would need to persuade the other members of the tower, so he requested a bit of patience. The prince assured him not to worry, stating that he completely understood the situation. He promised to make an official proposal shortly, at which point Hellman could provide his final answer. The Magic Tower's lord stated that he would eagerly await that day. Errol was taken aback that he was departing so soon and couldn't help but ask about the party. The Lord of the Magic Tower simply smiled, explaining that he was buried in work and wouldn't be able to be away from his duties for long. On top of everything, the black sorcerers had also organized, so he needed to have a word with them before things got completely out of hand. With that, he bid farewell and vanished into thin air. Arl was stunned, realizing the man had just teleported away, despite the powerful barrier surrounding the area. The prince, who had planned to eventually market that barrier technology, was now left wondering how Hellman had bypassed it so easily. A short while later, the prince went to see the emperor, who immediately asked where he had been. Arl had been conversing with the Lord of the Magic Tower while watching the black mages soaring through the sky, but he couldn't very well admit that. Instead, he simply reported that an urgent matter required his immediate attention. He also learned that his sister had already returned home out of fatigue, yet his father had been waiting for him this entire time. This meant the emperor must have something important to discuss with Aurella. For their conversation, they ascended to the top of the fortress wall where they could speak in private. Thiel began by saying he was still in disbelief that his son had constructed such an advanced city. His ingenuity was so profound it was as if he'd undergone a reincarnation with the knowledge of a master builder, a fact that never ceased to amaze him. "Allow me to ask you once more," he said. "Do you truly have no desire to return to the capital?" Aurella confirmed that was true, stating he still had a great deal to accomplish here. The emperor then sighed and said that he understood and would not press the matter further. He mused that perhaps this place suited Aurella far better than the capital, a place where he could be truly himself, almost as if he were reborn. The emperor confessed he was happy to witness such progress in Faltra. "To be honest," he continued, "it's your older brother Zale who wishes for your return the most." Aurella was surprised to hear this, wondering if his father had perhaps had too much to drink. It seemed too strange for his father to say such a thing, though he knew it was highly unlikely. While Aurella pondered this, the emperor informed him that he faced a difficult decision. Aurella immediately understood what his father was alluding to, the matter of the heir to the throne. It was time for his older brother to return to the palace and assume a key position. But Aurella wondered, did Zale truly want him to return to the palace and take a key position? If that was truly the case, then he was nothing like his manipulative mother. After weighing the possibilities, Aurella informed his father that he would connect with his older brother at a later time. Even as he said it, he was keenly aware that a new storm was brewing. The old struggle for the throne was about to be reborn. Once the grand feast celebrating the city's founding concluded, the residents began to settle in. The new citizens began to settle in with great enthusiasm, overjoyed that their new homes were a world away from the hovels they had merely survived in before. And from the royal palace, the final decree of approval arrived, after which Philia was officially recognized as a major city. A month passed, and our hero walked the city streets, savoring the vibrant atmosphere. He delighted in hearing the joyful comments people made about their new lives. The city had revitalized far more quickly than Aurella had ever anticipated, thanks to their promotional efforts that had successfully attracted both new residents and merchants to the area. Our hero mused that it seemed the city now had everything necessary for a comfortable existence, and even the most initially skeptical residents ought to be satisfied. In the end, it was a beautiful thing to be able to slip out into the neighborhood in disguise and simply observe. By the way, it was wonderful to see that the number of new merchants had increased so noticeably, a sure sign that his vision for the development of a tourism and entertainment industry in his town was taking root. As for their trading company, perhaps it was time to release new merchandise to meet Philia's growing demands. He just had to wonder what it could be. Suddenly, the boy heard a vendor shouting about a unique overseas product. He wondered if this was a Jewel store. Their headquarters was located in the Felven Kingdom, and they specialized in all sorts of exotic imported goods. In this world, shipbuilding technology was still not very advanced, so much so that it was believed boarding a ship was akin to signing your own death warrant. It was a shame the Empire of Arnesia didn't border any seas, so our hero decided to investigate what rare items this shop had to offer. Inside, he was welcomed immediately. The salesman's first order of business was to subtly size up his potential customer. He noted that the buyer wore jewelry that looked quite authentic, and furthermore, his suit was clearly crafted from expensive fabric. His shoes were also clean and neat, as if their owner rarely had to tread on common ground himself. Based on this mental list, the salesman decided he had hit the jackpot, so he kindly informed Aurella that they specialized in goods from other continents. He invited him to browse and choose, boasting of outlandish meats of various kinds and fancy overseas clothing. The prince had already scanned the premises and realized there was little of interest, though something did catch his attention just as the man was telling him about a large stock of herbs that were beneficial for one's health. Our hero inquired about the peculiar item he was interested in. The vendor paused at that, remarking on his unusual choice. He explained with an apology that they were quite useless fruits. They were a new arrival, but their taste turned out to be far too bitter, and they weren't even suitable for medicinal purposes. Aurella asked what the fruit was called anyway. The merchant hesitated, then said that the traders who brought it called it cacao. The moment he heard that name, a jolt of recognition from before his reincarnation electrified our hero. He was pumped, demanding to be sold every last one of the fruits they had. The salesman again tried to talk him out of it, but Aurella was persistent and bought the entire stock. A short while later, Asia reported that Lord Aurella was working on something new again. I believe he said he was inventing some new product, she noted. SAA confirmed it, adding that she couldn't imagine what he intended to make from those strange things. Knowing that gentleman though, she added, it's probably going to be something brilliant, as it always is. And indeed, the wizards were ecstatic, declaring his experiment a resounding success. The protagonist, feeling truly reborn with this opportunity, decided not only to adapt the cultivation conditions but to go much further, to cultivate a superior cocoa variant. The beans he now held were the fruit of painstaking labor, a venture that initially cost him half of his precious seeds. Yet, they had flourished so magnificently in just 1 month that Aurella was nearly moved to tears, a miracle he owed entirely to magic. After a moment of reflection, he turned to Dia, entrusting her with the final and most crucial step of his plan. Naturally, the talented mage readily agreed. Her task was to use the building provided by the prince to process and pulverize the beans from these miraculous fruits. It seemed like a fundamental waste of the immense talent of the city's most powerful mage, but it was undeniably the fastest and most reliable method. The sorceress completed the task with incredible speed and asked if her work was satisfactory. A pleased Errol confirmed that everything was absolutely perfect. As a reward for her efforts, he declared she would be the very first to sample the final product. The sorceress had already anticipated this, and with drool practically escaping her lips, she expressed her eagerness and immediately proceeded to finish the remaining work at an unbelievable pace. Errol mused that she must have already guessed this wasn't just any ordinary ingredient, given her sheer enthusiasm. A short while later, a delicate and sweet aroma began to fill the air. A fragrance Aurella knew intimately. It was unmistakably chocolate, the king of all desserts in the Empire of Energy, and the undisputed champion from his life before his reincarnation. He had missed chocolate more than words could say. Cocoa beans were non-existent here. Now, he was simply basking in the rich scent of this long-lost delicacy. As he savored the moment, he couldn't help but think how wonderful it was to have been reborn into this world, after all. A short time later, his companions gathered for the official presentation, looking a bit skeptical about his new invention. Ain, in particular, seemed irritated that the prince had pulled him away from his important work just for a snack. Errol explained that he planned to launch his venture by selling chocolate and cookies as standard items, but first, he wanted them to try everything he had prepared and give their honest opinions. Asia was the first to sample the cookies and donuts, exclaiming how much the children, especially, would adore them. The prince wholeheartedly agreed that kids would love these treats. Meanwhile, SAA dipped a piece of fruit into the chocolate fondue, marveling at how the tangy sweetness of the fruit paired flawlessly with the rich sweetness of the chocolate. Next, Errol turned to Ain, asking for his verdict. After all, it was crucial to get his opinion. But the old dwarf, Maul, interjected, noting that in his view, everything was far too sweet. Ultimately, only the rum-infused chocolates appealed to him because of their less intense sweetness, making them his preferred choice. The prince simply smiled, remembering that a dwarf's palate is a dwarf's palate, and then added that a blacksmith's work is incredibly demanding, so he believed the other craftsmen would truly appreciate such nutritious and energy-rich desserts. Aurel confirmed he was thinking along the same lines. In the end, all three tasters conceded that everything was delicious, with the girls confidently stating that he could successfully sell every single item presented. Errol, feigning surprise, asked if they were certain. After all, he revealed with a grin, this wasn't even half of his chocolate creations. As soon as the words left his mouth, servants filed into the room, carrying several dozen more trays laden with treats. The prince then remarked that he had gotten so engrossed in the creative process that he'd made an absolute mountain of confections. Chocolate stimulates the brain, after all, which might explain. With a triumphant look, he announced that this was only the beginning. The stunned faces of the girl, the mage, and the old dwarf said it all. They did quite enjoy it, however, and things in Philia were peaceful. Yet, by the second day, both Sia and Asa were already growing tired of even looking at the desserts. Simultaneously, the prince informed them that he had slightly altered the flavor, taking their feedback from the previous day into account. On the third day, he presented yet another variation, and soon the fourth day arrived, with the prince eager to showcase another creation. At that point, Asia had to apologize to the prince, admitting she simply couldn't continue with the taste testing. Sia quickly backed her up, explaining that even Dia was struggling to stand, while Ain had fled from the task much earlier. The prince finally realized that he had perhaps gone too far by forcing them to eat chocolate for 3 consecutive days. It was a poor decision, given how caloric the treat was. It could cause a dramatic increase in both weight and blood sugar, making it essential to stop. Upon hearing this, the girls mutually agreed to start exercising to counteract the effects, a plan which Dia wholeheartedly supported. Judging by their expressions, the prince understood they probably couldn't even stand the sight of chocolate for some time, so he decided he would eat the remainder himself, since his physique wouldn't be affected. And so, at the cost of the tear-filled nightmares of all his taste testers, over the past week, the final product was perfected. Soon, not only did general stores begin to stock it, but also, specialty shops dedicated solely to chocolate products began to appear. While many were initially skeptical, the incredible taste won everyone over. Consequently, a craze for chocolate spread like wildfire, reaching locals and visitors alike as word of the exotic treat went far and wide, a true reincarnation of a forgotten delicacy. Most importantly, the aristocrats were absolutely captivated by it, a reaction Richin claimed he hadn't witnessed since the initial boom in soda sales. As he listened to his uncle speak, the hero noticed that Richin had put on quite a bit of weight since their last meeting. His relative continued, explaining that requests to sell the chocolate to other estates were pouring in relentlessly. The strategy to launch a separate line of high-quality goods was a monumental success, allowing the business to be reborn with an elite new image. These luxury items weren't sold in regular shops and were available exclusively through pre-order. Errol deliberately marketed this expensive chocolate only to the nobility. But strangely, this exclusivity only fueled the demand among those eager to indulge in a taste of luxury. The hero reflected that he had only improved the packaging, used marginally more expensive ingredients, and added teleportation delivery. It was amazing how easily people were swayed by the word quality. Abruptly, his uncle inquired if he had any plans to expand production. He suggested that if the prince could sell the chocolate in bulk, his profits would soar even higher, but the prince admitted it wasn't a simple matter. His estate simply didn't have enough space to cultivate the fruit on the scale required, as they had already maximized cocoa productivity. There was no further room to expand the plantation, and the lands of Arnesia were naturally unsuitable for growing cocoa on their own. Without the aid of wizards cultivating it in mana-infused greenhouses, any further expansion was impossible. His uncle then asked about trading with the Geel firm. The hero confirmed it was the same company he bought the first bombs from, stating that while it was a future possibility, he had no immediate plans to engage with them. Hearing this, Richin expressed his disappointment, noting that the Geel firm was one of the very first organizations to show a keen interest in a partnership. The prince understood this, but revealed that while the main ingredient is cocoa beans, the specific recipe and production methods had to be kept a closely guarded secret. It would take any competitor a significant amount of time to master the technology, a fact they were well aware of. That's why they were pushing for a deal so aggressively, feigning to be on his side. With this in mind, the hero said, he saw no need for negotiation and couldn't fathom why he should even entertain their proposal. His primary motive for creating chocolate was for sheer enjoyment, not profit. He simply told them to wait and see what the outcome would be. The man who drafted that document was blinded by greed, completely disregarding the consequences for everyone else involved. His intellectual laziness led him to let events unfold unchecked, which ultimately culminated in war. You surely don't wish to repeat the mistakes of the past. It feels like he's trying to perfect everything he once accomplished, and in this reborn chance, we'll have to see how it all unfolds. As time went on, the aristocracy developed a taste for fine desserts, with chocolate quickly becoming a favorite, praised for its delightful sweetness. It was hailed as a wonderful compliment to tea and an incredible confection in its own right. The hostess then heard a rumor that this chocolate was extraordinarily difficult to acquire. She demurely agreed it wasn't easy, claiming she was merely lucky, though in truth, she knew it wasn't that simple at all. Errol had previously written to her, explaining that for chocolate to truly captivate the aristocrats, it had to be presented in a way that allowed them to savor its flavor in the most exclusive settings imaginable. So he asked for her help and also inquired how Hay and SS were faring. It's common knowledge among the nobility that Duchess Carrot and Errol are on excellent terms, which is why she is the one sharing the chocolate, so to speak. The entire affair is orchestrated to give the aristocrats a new way to flaunt their status. One of the ladies even commented on how much attention she had received because of it. Abruptly, a new voice interjected into their conversation, belonging to a woman who asked if she could possibly inquire where they had procured such a famous and high-end chocolate. Lady Carrot, taken aback, asked for the newcomer's identity, but one of her guests identified her as a ghoul, expressing surprise at her attendance. Upon hearing the surname, the Marquis asked if she was connected to the company of the same name. The woman confirmed it was true, introducing herself as Seal Ghoul, the owner of a trading company. Carrot mused that she had never once considered the company's owner could be a woman. The aristocrat then asked what intriguing items she had brought with her. Sile confidently noted that she had just the thing, something she was certain they would be interested in, and had brought a few samples. The Duchess wondered if all these nobles were actually Ghoul's clients. It became clear she had arrived as a merchant, not merely as a guest. An acquaintance pointed out to Seal that she seemed eager to inquire about the chocolate, and the merchant confirmed that this was true. She expressed a desire to speak with Mr. Errol regarding a business matter but lamented that he was notoriously difficult to contact, hoping perhaps the Duchess could arrange an introduction. Lady Carrot hesitated, explaining that while she'd love to help, the situation was Ghoul seemed to understand immediately, surmising that he was likely overwhelmed with work and that nothing could be done. She told them to forget what she had just said, smoothly redirecting their attention to the exclusive merchandise she had brought especially for them. Later, as the sun began its descent, Ghoul was already in her carriage, muttering about the tediousness of having to please everyone just to sell a few items. The man seated opposite her remarked that it couldn't be helped. If she didn't play their social games, she'd never even get past the gates of their estates. Sile acknowledged that she knew this perfectly well. Her attempt to get through to Lady Carrot had been a bust, and as for Errol's new chocolate product, there was still likely no answer. Her companion noted that Errol seemed completely uninterested in cooperating with them, which was unexpected for their target. He usually rushes to set up mass production. It's as if his reincarnation gave him knowledge of which ventures to pursue. Who knew these beans were such a treasure? Sile was certain he would struggle with large-scale reproduction. Was there not enough space on his own estate to cultivate the fruit? True, she'd heard that Philia had learned how to magically regulate the temperature, but that was hardly sufficient for large-scale cultivation. Cooperating with her was clearly to his advantage, so why the deep distrust? It was no wonder Ghoul found him perplexed. The simple truth was that Errol had created the confection purely for his own enjoyment. Undeterred, the young woman instructed her subordinates to continue sending proposals and to present him with their most favorable terms. Eventually, Richin had to report that the company's insistence was bordering on sheer desperation, asking if he should persist in his refusal. Errol sighed. He hadn't anticipated their persistence would become this extreme. His uncle then added that now, even the head of the trading company herself was requesting a personal meeting, leaving him completely unsure of how to proceed. Errol finally relented, agreeing to a single meeting. Turning to the changeling, he expressed hope that she wouldn't mind discussing matters over a cup of tea, and so he suggested they meet, and at last, the long-awaited day of the meeting with the owner of the Ghoul company had arrived. The woman was visibly pleased to finally meet Errol, and she introduced herself with all due formality. The prince, in turn, remarked that it was a pleasure to meet her as well, though he knew his uncle was utterly exhausted by the woman's persistent letters. His guest apologized for any inconvenience, explaining that as a businesswoman, she simply could not afford to let such a golden opportunity pass her by. Errol, for his part, studied her reaction, but she didn't appear the least bit so he suggested they get straight to the point. It was quite clear her company was exceptionally interested in his chocolate. Sinel stated that she would be completely frank with him. First and foremost, she was drawn by the immense profit potential of Mr. Errol's products. In this deal, she could offer a vast supply of high-quality fruits, a feat made possible by Goel's unique expertise in ocean cultivation, a technology unavailable to anyone else. The prince acknowledged that he had indeed heard of their trade reputation and the company's standing. That being said, it still failed to explain why he should cooperate with them specifically. The woman looked confused, not quite grasping his meaning. The hero explained that while mass trade is certainly a great venture that would bring in a lot of profit, they weren't the only ones who could supply him with the ingredients for such a scale of production. And even if he agreed, wouldn't that mean he would become completely dependent on them in the future? The young man, in this reborn life, knew that mass trade was a fantastic option, but having Goel as the sole supplier for his ingredients was a dangerously poor strategy. And what would he do if they suddenly changed their minds and ceased their fruit supply? The company could easily begin delaying deliveries under the pretext of having a high volume of orders and then start imposing conditions upon him. When large sums of money are involved, this sort of thing is all too common. Sinel retorted indignantly that such a thought had never even crossed her mind. Errol countered that even if she didn't plan to operate that way now, it didn't mean she wouldn't start doing so in the future. He urged her not to attempt to convince him that such a scenario was impossible. Anyone in business who fails to consider these eventualities is not destined to last very long. So, enough of the games. The woman's intentions were painfully obvious, especially considering how hard she was pushing to get what she wanted. Suddenly, she wondered aloud if the gentleman had no interest whatsoever in expanding his chocolate business. The young man simply asked what she thought about that. In his mind, however, he was already running through countless scenarios, calculating her next move. He had intentionally presented the deal in a very straightforward way, giving her the stage to act, all while he watched her every reaction with keen eyes. Yet, there was no real response, making Errol wonder if that was all she had. Seal then regretfully admitted that she didn't have a solution herself, but surmised that if she understood correctly, he already had one in mind. The prince confirmed this, stating that it might sound impolite, but if she were to present more favorable terms, he might just be persuaded to agree. His counterpart seemed to understand perfectly. She acknowledged his point and said she would keep it in mind before taking her. With that, the encounter concluded, and our hero could finally breathe a sigh of relief. It was at that moment Richard appeared. He confessed his surprise, admitting he fully expected Errol to accept the offer and was proven wrong. Errol explained that their terms were, in fact, quite tempting. The woman he was supposed to partner with had an impeccable reputation and sharp business sense. Hearing this, the man couldn't grasp why the prince had refused. Errol replied that it was a matter of intuition, a gut feeling he's learned to trust since his reincarnation. Getting involved with that woman was out of the question. She didn't strike him as a decent person in the slightest. Errol mused that, as a merchant, he could typically overlook selfish motives, but her aura felt frankly vile, a clear sign that nothing good could ever come from dealing with her. The young prince then turned with a request for his uncle. He asked him to investigate the location of the central Gothel store and, more importantly, to identify its clientele. His uncle assured him that his wish would be fulfilled. As dusk settled over the city, the woman returned to her residence, slamming the door behind her in a fit of rage. Her first thought upon entering was that she must have overlooked something crucial. Seal just couldn't comprehend why things had gone so disastrously wrong. She was convinced it wasn't simply a matter of him disliking the terms, and she was certain she hadn't said anything out of place. The man beside her cautiously wondered if the prince had suspected something. Her companion sharply interrupted him, warning that if he valued his life, he'd watch his tongue. He offered an immediate apology, and the woman in charge insisted that the prince couldn't possibly have seen through her plan. I've been exceedingly careful. Starting a fight with Aurella Eresia is, but what choice do I have? Suddenly, her subordinate asked if this meant she was giving up on the chocolate. Seal scoffed. Who said anything about that? Absolutely not. The key is to avoid provoking him directly, but this is far from over. We, in turn, will simply bide our time until the prince is forced to change his mind. Some time passed, and Errol was enjoying his chocolate as usual, without a single worry. Meanwhile, Fry's little ones were swarming all around him, and he hadn't a clue what to do with the brood. He remarked to his griffin that he and his mate were living an idyllic life. Still, 5 hatchlings was a handful. Before long, the baby griffins were even snatching his chocolate, and the prince had to fight to get it back. He lamented that it would be difficult to keep them all here and concluded it was probably best to give them away after seeing what the others thought. In response, Asha suggested that perhaps it would be better to simply set them free. The prince, however, explained that they couldn't be just released into the forest, as it could pose a significant danger to the local population. To him, they were pets, but they were still fundamentally monsters. Besides, he added, I'm not at all certain they could even survive in the wild now. They're accustomed to first-class fresh horse meat and their own private beds, so whether they could adapt to a feral life is a huge question. They are, after all, true predators, just with wings and a beak. The prince turned to Asha and asked if she might be able to take one herself. The young woman replied that it was simply impossible, as she didn't even have the space for one at her manor. Errol pressed on, wouldn't the heirs be absolutely thrilled? But his subordinates suspected they would be more terrified. Having been turned down, our hero decided his next stop would be to see SAA. In their homeland, it's not unheard of for girls to tame monsters. She confirmed this was true but insisted a griffin was on a whole other level. She pointed out that the prince, of all people, should be keenly aware of the immense amount of fodder they require. Our hero knew she was right, as horse meat was the mainstay of their diet. While he could afford it, the villagers certainly could not. They had no such means, so SAA had to refuse as well, declaring the cost was simply too high. DIA was next, but she shockingly suggested she had a great recipe for cooking a griffin, an offer the prince immediately shot down before heading to Ain. He explained the complicated situation and asked the old dwarf for ideas, but Ain couldn't understand why he was being consulted. He simply suggested using them as replacements for horses, but Errol quickly stated that wasn't a viable option. Ground transportation is far more reliable, he explained, and besides, the cargo that 5 griffins can carry is quite small. Suddenly, a thought. While they would struggle with bulky shipments, there would be no issue whatsoever with small parcels. Therefore, they could be used for an aerial delivery service, transporting jewels for aristocrats through the sky. An air route is substantially safer than the ground route. It would be virtually immune to theft, creating something like a Griffin Express delivery. Mulling over this idea, which felt familiar from his life before being reborn, the prince thanked Ain. He praised the dwarves for their consistent ingenuity, but the old man reminded him that he'd promised to discuss the metal in more detail. However, Errol was already dashing off, leaving Ain to grumble in annoyance that the young man never listened to him fully. Errol began to think it was a brilliant idea. If they already used birds to send letters, a courier personally delivering packages on a griffin would be even better. A griffin-mounted courier would also look incredibly impressive, so all that remained was to train the creatures properly. Just then, his butler rushed. The butler informed the prince that they were in trouble, immediately putting the young man on high alert as his subordinate presented a letter, urging him to read it. He hoped it wasn't another crisis like the one with the undead, but upon reading the contents, he actually started laughing. He had been expecting his rival to come up with something extraordinary, and she had certainly delivered. The cacao bean was now officially a pagan fruit. What an absolute load of nonsense. This decree originated from the Holy Kingdom of Jelan Felion, where the high priest of the Holy Kingdom was seen holding a cocoa bean aloft. He proclaimed that outside their continent, evil heathens grind this very thing and consume it as a beverage. This fruit, he declared, belongs to the heathens and is likely used in demonic rituals. He warned the people not to be tricked and to resist the temptation of its momentary sweetness, for whoever tastes this fruit will be declared a heretic, and the wrath of God will fall upon them. Richard informed his lord that he never expected the personate